Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that strange silence after someone walks out of your life? That quiet moment where you replay every word, every text, every look, and wonder if he'll ever come back. You check your phone, nothing. You convince yourself you've moved on, but there's still that one question that won't let you go. Will he come back when someone walks out of your life, especially someone you still care about? It can feel like the emotional cord between you is still tightly attached, even if they're gone physically. In those moments, it's natural to want to fix things, to reach out, to hold on a little tighter, but ironically, the moment that often triggers a shift, the moment that begins the process of someone truly noticing your absence, is when emotional detachment takes place. That's when things start to move in the direction you didn't expect. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring overnight or that you flip a switch and suddenly become indifferent. It's much more subtle than that. It's when your life slowly starts to fill up again with things that aren't about him. When your thoughts aren't dominated by questions like what is he thinking or will he come back. It's when you stop trying to manage his perception of you and start focusing on your own well-being. You're no longer driven by fear of losing him, but by the desire to find peace. That's when detachment begins. This shift is powerful, because for so long, everything about your energy was focused outward on the connection, on him, on the hope of reconciliation. But emotional detachment is the return of energy back to you. It's when you start choosing your peace over your panic, your clarity over your confusion. The emotional noise begins to settle, and with that stillness comes the strength to see things clearly. You stop justifying behavior that never sat right with you. You stop lowering your standards to accommodate his comfort. Here's the paradox. The moment you genuinely begin to let go emotionally is often the moment he feels it. Not because you told him, not because you posted something on social media, but because energy doesn't lie. When someone feels that you're no longer emotionally available to them in the same way, when they realize their actions no longer pull the same emotional reaction from you, that's when it hits them. Your detachment becomes louder than any message you could send. It becomes the message. In many situations, emotional detachment creates space for reflection. Not just for you, but for him too. He starts to wonder why you're not chasing, why you've gone quiet, why you've become more elusive, more self-assured, more unbothered. That curiosity can become uncomfortable for someone who was used to having your energy as a constant. The silence you once feared becomes the space where he has to finally face what he lost. Emotional detachment is not revenge. It's not a tactic. It's not a game. It's a shift in your emotional center. You stop orbiting someone else and come back home to yourself. And that's when everything begins to change, because someone coming back isn't always about what they realize. It's about what they feel they no longer have access to. There's a moment in every connection where words begin to lose their power. You've said everything you could. You've expressed your needs, your pain, your hopes, and still nothing changes. That's when silence steps in, not as a punishment, but as a shift in energy. When you stop explaining yourself, stop begging to be understood, and instead choose stillness, that silence starts to speak volumes, and in many cases it speaks louder than anything you ever said with words. Silence creates contrast. When someone has had consistent access to your thoughts, your love, your time, and suddenly that flow stops, not out of bitterness, but because you've chosen yourself, it sends a shockwave. They're not used to the quiet. They're used to the reaction. They expect the follow-up text, the emotional outburst, the checking in. But when none of that comes, it throws them off balance. They start to notice not just your absence, but the presence of the void you used to fill. There's a power in not reacting. It communicates a boundary without ever having to announce one. It shows strength without showing anger. When someone is no longer receiving the feedback they were once used to, they're forced to sit with their own behavior. And that silence, it holds up a mirror. Sometimes the most transformational realization doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from the moment someone hears nothing at all. You see, when someone thinks they can always reach you, always explain things later, always expect a response, it gives them a kind of unconscious permission to take you for granted. But when your silence arrives, it breaks that rhythm. It shows them that access to you was a privilege, not a right, that your time, your words, your attention were gifts, not guarantees. And people tend to notice value more clearly in its absence than they ever did in its presence. This isn't about playing games. It's not about withholding affection or punishing someone through silence. It's about choosing peace over performance. It's about recognizing when conversations have become circular, when explanations are no longer heard, and when it's time to step back, not to manipulate, but to reclaim your energy. In that silence, you begin to rediscover yourself. You begin to think more clearly, breathe more deeply, and live more presently. He might come back, he might not, but if he does, it won't be because you convinced him with words. It will be because he felt the difference when your energy disappeared from his life. He felt what life was like when your reassurance was no longer a given, when your presence was no longer guaranteed. Silence creates space, and in that space, people either realize what they had or they reveal what they never truly valued. Either way, silence is the moment where clarity begins for both people involved. There's a subtle but undeniable shift that happens when someone begins to embody true confidence. It's not about loud declarations, dramatic gestures, or pretending not to care. Real confidence is quiet, it's calm, it's grounded in a sense of self-worth that doesn't need to be proven or defended. When a person carries themselves with that kind of quiet certainty, it changes how others respond to them. And in the context of love and relationships, it's one of the most powerful forces of attraction there is. Confidence is magnetic because it says, "I am enough." It doesn't chase, it doesn't beg, it doesn't shrink to fit into someone else's comfort zone. When you stop trying to prove your value to someone and start living as though you already know it, that energy becomes undeniable. You're no longer available in the same way you were before, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're genuinely invested in your own life. That kind of confidence draws people in because it's rare, and because it creates mystery. It makes them want to understand what changed, what's different about you now, why your presence feels more powerful even in your absence. Desperation, on the other hand, repels. It creates pressure. It says, "I need you to validate me. I need you to choose me so I can feel okay again." And that energy, even when it's unspoken, is heavy. It's emotionally expensive. People can sense when you're not grounded, when your peace depends on their response, and it creates a dynamic where they begin to pull away. Not because they don't care, but because no one wants to feel like they're responsible for someone else's emotional stability. The more you chase, the more they run. The more you plead, the more they retreat. Not because your feelings are invalid, but because the energy behind them becomes overwhelming. What often causes someone to come back isn't that you convinced them. It's that they feel the absence of your need for them. They see that you've stopped orbiting them and started creating a life that doesn't depend on their participation, and that confidence, pure, quiet, inner confidence, makes them see you through a different lens. Suddenly, you're not the person begging to be chosen. You're the person who realized you had a choice all along. That shift is powerful. It flips the dynamic entirely, not through manipulation, but through self-awareness. You begin to show up differently in the world. You walk into rooms with your head a little higher. You smile more because your happiness isn't waiting on a text message or someone else's decision. That's the moment people start to notice. They don't know what changed, but they feel it. And sometimes it's in that very moment of unexpected confidence that the person you thought you lost starts to find their way back. drawn in by the strength they can now see in you without a word being spoken. There comes a point after heartbreak when something shifts. Not overnight, not with some dramatic moment, but gradually. You start putting your energy back into yourself. You stop waking up every day checking your phone for their name. You begin showing up differently in your own life, not to make anyone notice, but because you finally start noticing yourself again. And it's in that quiet rebuilding, when you're no longer focused on whether he'll come back, that something interesting happens. That's when he begins to feel your absence. When you reclaim your life, your time, your focus, and your identity, you become less emotionally available to the past and more present in the now. The habits that once revolved around him, waiting, hoping, overthinking, begin to fade. You say yes to plans without wondering if he'll text. You make decisions without checking your phone every hour. You laugh more, move more freely, breathe without that tight feeling in your chest. And even though you may not realize it in the moment, that's when your presence begins to shift. People feel energy. They may not be able to put their finger on it, but when someone has had constant access to your attention, and that suddenly disappears, not because you're angry, but because you've moved forward, they feel it. He starts to wonder what happened. Why aren't you reaching out? Why does it seem like you've stopped waiting? And it's not because you're doing something to get a reaction. You're just doing you. That difference can be unsettling to someone who once relied on your emotional availability. He may not notice it the first day or even the first week, but over time the absence becomes real. The comfort of knowing you'd always be there starts to dissolve. That's when the realization begins to form, not because you reminded him of what he lost, but because the reality of your absence is setting in. An absence, when someone was used to being centered in your world, creates a space that can no longer be ignored. The more you rebuild your life, the more grounded you become in your own worth. You start attracting new energy. You begin doing things that bring you joy. Your focus expands beyond the confines of that old relationship. And as your light grows stronger, it starts to shine in places he never imagined. That's when he starts to feel something, not necessarily regret at first, but curiosity, confusion, maybe even panic, because the person he expected to still be waiting is now out of reach, not because you shut him out, but because you've truly moved forward. When you were always there, he didn't have to think about what life without you felt like. But now, every day that goes by without your voice, without your attention, without your energy, it registers. And what he feels isn't just your physical absence, but the emotional gap left behind when you stopped making him the center of your world. One of the most overlooked truths in relationships is how growth changes everything. When you go through a breakup or someone pulls away from you, the first instinct is often to focus outward, on what they're doing, what they're thinking, whether they're missing you. But the real shift doesn't happen out there. It happens inside, because the version of you that existed when things fell apart is not the same version that starts to emerge when you commit to your own growth. And that contrast between who you were and who you're becoming is often what sparks regret in the other person. Growth isn't about becoming someone new just to make him want you again. It's about rediscovering the parts of yourself you forgot while trying to hold onto someone who wasn't meeting you fully. It's in small choices, choosing peace over drama, choosing your future over repeating old cycles, choosing to learn the lesson instead of replaying the pain. These are the moments where transformation begins. Not all at once, but gradually, and with every shift in mindset, every boundary reinforced, every new experience embraced, you begin to step into a more powerful version of yourself. This new version of you sees things more clearly. You're no longer interested in proving your worth. You're no longer emotionally addicted to potential. You stop fighting for a connection that left you feeling unsure. And while that growth feels incredible from the inside, it also creates a noticeable change on the outside. The way you carry yourself, the decisions you make, the energy you bring into a room, it all begins to evolve. and the contrast between the person they once knew and the person you've become becomes impossible to ignore. Regret is often born from realizing too late that someone has changed in a way that now feels out of reach. It's not just missing the memories or the routine. It's missing the chance to experience this new version of you, the one who glows differently, who no longer tolerates the bare minimum, who knows what she brings to the table. That's what creates the emotional shift in him, not the texts, not the reminders, not the begging. It's the realization that the door he thought would always be open might not be anymore. Not because you slammed it shut, but because you simply outgrew that version of yourself that kept it wide open. When you grow, you raise the standard of the love you accept. You stop settling for breadcrumbs and start demanding the full meal, and that elevation can be intimidating to someone who hasn't evolved in the same way. They feel the difference in how you respond, how you speak, how you no longer react the way you used to. That calmness isn't coldness, it's clarity. That silence isn't distance, it's peace. That boundary isn't punishment, it's self-respect. And all of those things together create a version of you that might just be the one he now wishes he had recognized sooner. There's a moment in the healing process when something unexpected happens. You stop waiting, not because you've given up hope completely, but because your priorities have changed. The person who once consumed your thoughts slowly fades in the background of your life. You start making plans without factoring them in. You begin smiling more often for reasons that have nothing to do with them. And somewhere in that quiet shift, you realize you no longer need them to come back in order to feel whole. That's when everything starts to change. Needing someone creates pressure. It turns love into survival. You cling, you question. You overanalyze. Your self-worth becomes entangled in their presence or absence. But the moment you stop needing someone is the moment your power returns. It's not that you don't care. It's that your happiness is no longer dependent on their actions. You've detached the outcome from your sense of value. You've learned to be okay with uncertainty. You've accepted that closure might never come from them, and instead you've found it within yourself. This inner shift is magnetic. People can sense when your energy is no longer tied to their approval, when you've stopped checking your phone every 5 minutes, when you're not mentally writing scripts for conversations that may never happen. That kind of peace radiates differently. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't chase. It simply exists with strength, and ironically, it's often at this point, when your world is no longer orbiting around him, that he begins to notice. He notices because something feels unfamiliar. The version of you that once felt so predictable, so emotionally available, has evolved. You're not sending the same signals. You're not reacting to the things that used to trigger you. He starts to feel difference, not because you made a point to show it, but because it's real. Your life is moving forward. You're investing in new things, creating new routines, building new dreams, and he feels that absence, not just in communication, but in the emotional space you once gave so freely. This doesn't mean you no longer have emotions tied to him. It doesn't mean you've erased the past. It simply means you're no longer held hostage by it. You can miss someone and still choose yourself. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can love who they were and still know you deserve more than what they gave. That's the kind of strength that shifts dynamics completely. It changes the way someone sees you, especially if they expected you to wait. When you stop needing someone to come back, it gives them space to truly see what they walked away from. And if they do come back, it won't be to the same version of you they left behind. It will be to someone who survived without them, who thrived without their validation, who realized that needing someone isn't the same as loving them, and that the strongest kind of love is the one you first give to yourself.